Sound is on.
Hello.
Hello. Can people hear us? Is this working? I hope so.
Should be. Anybody in chat can hear us, or do we need to turn on something else?
Aaron hit us with a dab. All right, I like it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Ian hit us with a dab. I
don't know if that
I don't know
means
if
they
that's an
can hear
answer
us.
to the question.
All right, Ian's got us.
All right, excellent. So if we do this, and then bang, beautiful. All right, so we're good.
Yeah.
Welcome to the first MCSP Lunch and Learn.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just do our introduction. Do you want to start off?
I'm William. Just finished my junior year at Champlain College, working towards a degree in computer networking and cybersecurity. And this summer I'm working on the CARSec project for MCSP, which I'll talk about in a minute or two. Background is a lot of software development, networking, and hardware repair.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm Austin Grupposo. I'm the class of 2023, Digital Forensics and Cybersecurity, and I'm on the AMSec project for MCSP, which is Additive Manufacturing, or in a more simplistic term, 3D printing. And some of my background is in different forms of compliance, so SOC 2, PCI, general IT governance, vulnerability management, and a lot of that goes into what I'm going to be talking about today as well. So I guess we'll start with CARSec.
Yeah. So
laptop's yours.
CARSec stands for Car Security. And for those of you who aren't familiar, because I know I wasn't too familiar with car security jumping into the project, car security, at least in the terms of my project, is just talking about the rules and regulations that manufacturers have to follow, as well as like the previous vulnerabilities that have been found in cars, and then taking it a step further. I've been looking into connected cars and how their technologies can be like exploited, and creating some sort of like threat model surrounding all that. So it's a pretty interesting sort of idea. So with that connected car idea, I went about and created this sort of map of what I figured to be the most important technologies within vehicles in 2020. So at the top of the screen there is the sort of external network that the cars can communicate on. So there's things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and satellite, and then down below there's the more internal network that most consumers don't see a lot of most of the time. That has to do with like the safety protocols and the way that the engine's powertrain runs, and all of these connect in a really interesting way depending on the different manufacturer. But just to break all these down sort of one by one, in the bottom left there's the V2X, and that stands for vehicle to everything capabilities, and that is the sort of way that a lot of vehicles now will talk to other vehicles on the road and use sensors and cameras and radar to sort of, if you think about like Tesla and their autopilot system, they use a lot of vehicle to everything technology where they're talking to other Teslas on the road to figure out vehicle conditions and traffic conditions, so that the car that you're in knows exactly what it's getting into and how it can best manage that situation. In the top left, you guys can't actually see it because it's covered by our little camera feed, but there's the mobile communications up there. And there we go. And that's just sort of the everyday. You get into your car, you hook up your phone to your radio system, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on there that can lead to sort of vulnerabilities with CarPlay and Android Auto. as well as right next to it you can see the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi capabilities. And with that, I'm sort of talking about the way that the different wireless stacks work in your car. So Bluetooth, not the most secure protocol or service out there. So putting it in a car allows for like a really easy entryway into the vehicle's internal network that you see down below. And when I say Wi-Fi here, I'm not talking about like the way that you can create like hotspots within the vehicle. I'm more so referring to the fact that on a lot of newer cars, you can connect them to your internal network and like your home network and download sort of like over-the-air updates. So then instead of taking your car to the shop when there's a recall or it needs a new firmware, people can just do that right from their driveway, which makes things a lot more secure. As when recalls used to come out, people would see them, they wouldn't think much of them, and they would just leave their vehicle on the road. So for example, like in 2015, there was a huge exploit that came out regarding, it was Chrysler vehicles, I believe. It was Jeeps and Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, all those really popular car companies. And it basically, within the wireless hotspot that you could create, there was open ports that really anyone could connect to, anyone on the Sprint network could connect to. And from there, you had basically unlimited access to the internal network and all the methods and functions that the car uses on a daily basis. So that allowed people to basically take control of the car. They could turn the steering wheel if the car had like park assist, because that allows the computer to control the steering wheel. They could throw on the brakes. They could even just shut down your engine. So those two really need to be focused on, as well as the RDS systems, the radio data system, because you can also send messages to the vehicle that way using like the same exact way that cars get the information as to like what song you're listening to. Those come in short strings of information that attackers can send like spoofed messages into to try and trick the computer into giving you access. Moving on to the right of those are the eSIM and the satellite capabilities a lot of modern cars have. So satellite refers to the wireless hotspot that you can create, or the OnStar system. So if you get an accident or you need help, you just hit a button in your car and it reaches out. The GPS tracking a lot of times uses satellite. So all those things that people use pretty regularly rely on that technology. Same with eSIM. That's something that maybe not a lot of people use regularly in their car, but it is mandated to have some sort of either eSIM or actual SIM card within the vehicle in case of emergencies, just so you can reach out to emergency services. And then, so all those come together to the external network. And if someone were to crack one of those, they would be able to move into, depending on how the vehicle's network was segmented, they'd be able to move down into the internal network, which is at the bottom of the screen there. And that talks about the different safety, power management, and sort of body controls aspect of the car. So obviously something like the body controls, if they were to get access to, it wouldn't result in too much damage, because that just talks about like the wipers and the turn signals and all the things where like you hit a switch in your car and then it does something physical. But if they were to get access to like the safety systems and they disabled the emergency braking or the lane keep assist, that could obviously turn into something pretty dramatic and bad if the driver was relying on those systems to do things. So like, how exactly does one move from the external network to the internal network is pretty easy, at least in cars. Maybe not in like the new 2020, 21 cars, because companies are starting to take cybersecurity more into account when creating vehicles. But if you look at vehicles from like 2013 to like 2018, when they had all these tech, but the companies didn't care too much about them. It's actually it's 4 steps of how to get into the car. So down on the right that's our hacker, and he's decided that he's found this car and he wants to take control of the steering wheel in the car. So he's going to get on his laptop and he's going to look online and find some vulnerability in the Bluetooth stack that the car has. And from there he's gonna compromise the Bluetooth system, which would give him access to some basic stuff within the car. He'd be able to move around, check out the different sort of protocols that are being used and the different services that are running, and he might even be able to see some of like the file systems or like the ECU layout within the car. So once he's into the car, all he has to do really is similar to how you would attack a normal network. You would want to initially find yourself a spot to enter the network, and from there you'd move around to see like what you can find, what you can access, and you just sort of bounce around the network finding different vulnerabilities. You do the exact same thing in a car. So he's going to try and move from that little Bluetooth stack that he's found his home in into one of the electronic control units. And those are just chips. They work on really pretty old and simplistic protocols, and they control the various cyber physical devices within the car. So like, for example, he sees that this ECU that he has gained access to by moving laterally controls the steering wheel. He could have found one that controlled the acceleration or the brake, but he found the one that controlled the steering wheel. And from there, he's gonna basically listen to that car, the messages that ECU is being sent and receiving as that car's moving. Because thousands of messages are being sent at any time. He has to take those messages and figure out what message does what to the vehicle. So usually they come in about 2 to 4 bit chunks, and only 2 of those bits actually tell the vehicle to do something. So they're pretty small messages that he has to pick out. So it's not, although the steps make it seem simplistic, it does take a lot of time. But let's say he's put the time in and he's figured out what message makes the steering wheel turn 90 degrees to the left. And he knows that it's just the letter A. If the steering wheel ECU receives anything with the hexadecimal character A in it, it's going to yank the steering wheel to the left. So he's going to do the same exact thing he did. He's going to crack the Bluetooth stack, move laterally the same way, and then he's going to start sending spoofed messages to the ECU. And the electronic control unit, ECU, is going to see those messages, and it, depending on the car, it might be smart enough to say, no, that's not actually happening, let's not do that. But some cars will just see that message and yank over to the left, which obviously is a really big vulnerability. And if you compare that to what happened in 2015, there were about 2 million vehicles on the road that a sort of vulnerability like this applied to. But it just proves that going into only like the first 2 weeks, obviously I couldn't walk up to a car and do this, but I understand like the basics of how it works, and really anyone that wanted to could figure this out and apply these methods to a car. So it's important that the manufacturers are taking this into account and taking the same steps that anyone working on a normal network would take to secure it. So adding firewalls and segmented networks, just all those same sort of protocols that you'd follow for a normal network should be followed in a car. So moving forward from here, like I said, I had that as part of your project, you get to Aaron, I don't think so yet, Aaron. I'm still working with the client a little bit to sort of figure out what the scope of the project is. So like the first week I focused a lot on the regulations and the sort of history of automobile security, and this last week I focused on the actual steps to exploit vulnerabilities within cars, and then next week I'm going to focus on the threat model behind connected cars, and from there going to present that to the client and get feedback on what they would like to be focused on more for the last 2 months of the project. So I mean, that could be a possibility, but I don't think that that's the way it's going to end up going, but it would be really cool. But besides that, I mean, car security is definitely something that we're going to see more of in the future. So it's pretty interesting for me, at least, to be able to dive into it firsthand. But that's all I got for the first 2 weeks and for my piece of the Lunch and Learn session.
All right, my turn?
Yeah.
All right, AMSec. So like I said before, AM, Additive Manufacturing, it's like a fancy term for 3D printing, but it goes a lot deeper than that, than just simply printing out things that you want to do at home. There's companies like General Electric, Boeing, Nike, ExxonMobil, with their pipelines, all uses all sorts of 3D printing technologies. But the most important customer of these 3D printing technologies is the U.S. government. And as we know, supply chain risk is a very, very scary thing to explore, but a very important thing to explore. Recently, the SolarWinds hack brought down a lot of crucial measures that went into national security, and ever since then the Department of Defense has decided to fast track what they're calling the CMMC, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, kind of a mouthful. So this is pulled right from the Department of Defense, and they said essentially it's a unifying standard for the implementation of cybersecurity across the defense industrial base. So essentially it's designed to lock down supply chain risk and protect national security. It's becoming so strict that if you want to do right now it's only the Department of Defense, but if you want to do these contracts, you want to be a contractor, or even if you're a subcontractor, you will not be able to do any business with the government if you don't meet these strict compliance rules. And it's just to make sure that you're only as strong as your weakest link, and if your weakest link is a wide open network from one of your clients, then that's not going to be very good. So the CMMC is broken down into what should be, for most people in information security, very familiar 17 capability domains. So access control, asset management, audit and accountability, awareness and training. So access control is obviously making sure that things are locked down and only approved individuals have access to the systems that they need access to. Asset management is keeping track of everything from your technological assets to your intellectual property, anything like that. Audit and accountability, it's very important to be able to look at a system or look at a user, say one of your employees, and know exactly what it is that they're doing or what they have been doing on a particular system, especially if it has some type of classified information. You want to be able to trace that back. Awareness and training is also super important. A lot of that deals with social engineering, stuff like phishing or vishing. You want to make sure that your employees are actually aware of why information security is so important and why being compliant with CMMC is important to the company as a whole. Configuration management just goes into your actual network configuration. That goes also a lot into some of the stuff that Will was talking about, in the sense that you want to make sure that when you have these segmented networks that they're properly implemented. Identification and authentication, making sure that someone is authenticated when they're accessing a system, similar to access control. Access control makes use of this authentication. Incident response, hopefully not something that you'll have to deal with as much as everything else. Incident response is a rather reactive instance as opposed to everything else I mentioned so far that's proactive. Incident response, literally responding to incidents that may occur, making sure you have that plan set up. If for some reason there is some type of security breach, you want to be able to handle that. And a lot that goes into that is maintenance, making sure that things are staying updated. Technologies in your company aren't outdated. If they have security updates, you make sure that those are done, which also right below that goes into risk management. That's part of risk management. Media protection, personnel security, and physical protection also kind of fall into the same umbrella. Information security is a lot more than just having firewalls or having strong passwords. It's also about physical security. It doesn't matter. You could have the best information security, the best firewall in the world. If someone can just walk into your office and log onto your computer, then that kind of defeats the whole purpose, and that will be useless anyways. Security assessments and situational awareness goes into actual audits. A lot of these are done internally or with third-party assessors who kind of take a look at your organization, and they kind of tell you where the gaps in your security are and maybe give you some suggestions on what you can do to close those gaps. The last two are a little cut off here, but system and communications protection and system and information integrity. Which essentially goes into a lot of time, and in a lot of instances it goes into the intellectual property itself, and when you're communicating both internally and externally, if you have clients, if you have third-party vendors, if you are talking with potential customers, anything like that. So this is kind of like, I'm not going to go through all this here, but this is, it's breaking down all these capabilities that the Department of Defense has worked on, and currently the current administration in the Pentagon is actually reviewing the CMMC. They're going through constant reviews to make sure that it is the best that it can possibly be. So these are the 17 capability domains are all based on ISO, NIST, and the UK Cyber Essential frameworks, which are all implemented across pretty much any given organization. They're going to be trying to be compliant to one of those three, if not multiples. And it consists of what you see here is 171 total practices over five main levels of compliance. So level one is, I believe what they're calling it, is basic cyber hygiene. That's something that even the smallest and most simplistic of organizations should be following already. And if they're not, it's honestly surprising that they've made it this far. Level 3 is kind of like the middle ground where most organizations are going to be. From what the Department of Defense said, between level 4 and 5, which are advanced and proactive security compliance, there's only going to be an estimated 40 companies across the entire country that will actually need to fall into that line. So those are companies where their intellectual property is extremely, extremely important to national security. So it's not something that most organizations and most contractors are going to have to deal with. So before I do that, so essentially once you go through these third-party assessments, I believe the Department of Defense has just approved the first one, which is it's a company, I believe they're based in Nevada, who are going to be the third-party assessors to essentially come into these organizations, do these internal audits, look at all these controls, make sure that you are meeting those current levels. Afterwards, you have 90 days to fix any issues that they found, and then the DoD will slap you with a 3-year certification, which allows you to be awarded these contracts. As of now, I believe the first 7 CMMC contracts are already out there and they're open for bids, and there's plenty of companies that are bidding on them, which they're still allowed to do, but you will not be awarded those contracts until you are actually compliant, which isn't necessarily possible yet because they haven't started doing audits. So this is a very, very new framework, and it's something that's going to go into a lot more than just additive manufacturing. Pretty much anyone that has anything to do that sells to some type of Department of Defense organization, whether you're selling, something like additive manufacturing processes, whether it's actual 3D printers or it's actual materials that you're printing for them, whether you're selling them something as simple as, laptops from Lenovo or Dell, you're selling them mice and keyboards, you're selling them TVs, cameras, microphones, whatever it is. If you are selling something to the government, to the Department of Defense, one of their organizations, you're going to need to find some way to be compliant on one of these CMMC levels. Otherwise, you're simply not going to be awarded those contracts. And it's really, I think it's an important conversation to have because, like I said, what we saw with that SolarWinds hack was terrifying because it took just one company to be broken into, and so many different government organizations were heavily affected by it. So I know it's not as interesting as hacking into cars and making people drive off the road and all that. but it's still an important aspect of information security. Compliance always has been. And I'm interested to see where it goes in the future with how strict this security really goes. I already know throughout the news the Biden administration has been talking extensively about new cybersecurity controls and kind of amping that up, stuff like ransomware and stuff like that. And this is just kind of a branch of that is slowly being introduced into our actual real-world application. So with that being said, we've still got some time left, so we can open it up to questions either about CARSec, AMSec, MCSP. We could explain what the Munich Cyber Security Program actually is, how we got connected with these clients, how we got into these projects, anything really. We've got time to talk about. Why don't we can switch over to this. We'll have a more
it's pretty
intimate conversation.
Well, you guys are thinking of questions or whatever. It's pretty crazy that I know you mentioned that the CMMC standard was fairly new, and I know with the research I'm doing, a lot of the regulations for cars are fairly new too.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy how like behind sort of like all these standards are, because like people have been hacking since like the 90s.
Yeah.
And we're just now starting to like regulate what needs to be done how it needs to be done.
I think with standards like this, we need to, just as a nation, just need to learn to be more proactive with it. Like a lot of these standards are reactive. Like I know, for like what you were talking about with cars, some of those frameworks, some of those compliance things, it's like, oh, people are hacking into our cars. Yeah. Maybe we should make some type of standard to ensure that this doesn't happen, because technology is always evolving.
So Kaya asked, should I be worried about my car's security, or is there anything I can do to secure my car? So I mean, if you have a car from like 2015 and you're worried about it, chances are that you are completely fine, and there's nothing, no one's gonna come up to your 2014 Toyota Corolla or whatever and just start poking at it with a laptop. No, so I mean, the one thing that I have noticed, sort of looking through all my research, I've noticed a couple websites that list like the tips and tricks for keeping your car secure, and there are sort of wrongdoers who will try and spoof your key fob almost so through your door. So they'll see your car parked in the driveway, and if you leave your key directly on a table as soon as you enter the door, they'll try and extend the range on it so that the keyless entry into your car works. So I mean, that's the one tip I can think of off the top of my head, is to maybe not keep your keys directly in front of your door, because there are people who have the technology to extend that range of it, and then they can just walk up to your door and open it and drive away.
All right. Ian asks, were there any regulations or standards that seemed irrational or do not make sense? I know for me personally, looking at CMMC, it is very, very strict. There's no room for, there's no leeway. There's no, custom ways of going about it like you can with, for example, something like ISO 2700. If you don't follow exactly what their suggestion is, you can say, well, we achieve this through a different method. That's not something that the government is going to allow you to do. But just because it's very strict doesn't necessarily mean that it's irrational. I really don't think there's any aspect of information security that's irrational, personally.
No, I think if we're talking about it being irrational to the point where it's like too strict, I think that's more so a good thing.
You're right.
Because I'd rather be more secure than sort of half cover everything and leave that risk up in the air that you could get hacked or you couldn't have your car drive off the road,
Yeah.
Aaron says he's going to start putting endpoint detection and response tools on your car. I don't know if you have to go that far, Aaron, but if you want to tinker around with it, that sounds great.
I would check with manufacturers first. Might void some warranties on your car if you do that. Especially as Tesla does not like people messing around with their cars.
Tesla, you can register your car as like a test vehicle, and then if you like accidentally like flash the firmware, you just bring it in and be like, "Oops."
Just make sure you tell them that ahead of time. Yeah. So, are there any other last minute questions? Whether it's about projects, ComCode, MCSP. Michael asks, for these standards, how much of the security is on the manufacturer to implement versus the purchaser's responsibility? Could you be more specific? When you say how much is when you say the purchase? Okay, so are you talking like in context of, for example, like buying a car? Is that what you're saying?
So I mean, if he's talking, I think he's more talking about like the Department of Defense buying a contract. Is that more on them to see the regulation through, or?
Okay, gotcha. No, so it is definitely 100% on the manufacturer. That is why these frameworks are so strict. It's kind of like if you're a purchaser, if you're a buyer of anything, you want to do your research first. Of course, like if you're going to go, you're going to visit a particular store that has a reputation for selling counterfeit products, for example, and everybody knows it, but you didn't do your research, that's kind of on you. But this isn't that type of situation. There's this level of expectation that the manufacturer will be compliant, and if they're not, with the way the Department of Defense sets up these contracts, your name won't even show up. So, for example, if NASA wants someone to make something for their rocket ships they don't want to do in-house, they'll post the contract up and it'll pop up and they'll say like, okay, these organizations can fill these contracts for us. Your name won't even pop up if you don't have CMMC certification. So you'll essentially be blacklisted from government contracting if you don't follow those rules. Like for a car, how security aware do I have to be versus the manufacturer has to make secure?
So same thing that you were just talking about. It's all on the manufacturer, because like when you're buying a car as a consumer, you obviously are expected to look into things like the features of the car. Does it have leather seats, or what kind of speakers does it have? But no one that's going car shopping is being like, oh, does this car manufacturer follow ISO 21434?
Except for people like us.
Yeah, maybe people like us. But even then, it's all on the manufacturer. And that's why, so 21434 is sort of the main regulation. It's not even out yet. It's still being developed. But once it does come out, most big name manufacturers are going to have to follow it. So that will make the market a lot more secure than what it is now, because there's some regulations, but they don't cover everything completely, and companies don't have to be compliant with all of them. So there's some that cover the access points within the car, like externally, and then there's some that cover the actual architecture, the network, but there's none that covers them all together, and that's sort of what ISO 21434 is going to talk about. So having that will change the market for manufacturers, definitely.
Yeah, because when you're a consumer, you have that reasonable expectation of security. Like, I obviously think it's important for people to be conscious of information security topics in general, just because technology is present in our everyday lives, and that's just something that people are going to naturally have to incorporate into their street smarts per se. But you shouldn't have to ask questions of the manufacturer as far as security. That should be all on them.
Yeah.
And if they happen to, whether it's through negligence or they skimp out on certain controls, then there's definitely consequences for that legally.
Yeah.
So they definitely have that incentive, I think. All right. So we're coming up on 35 minutes, which is going a little over our time, but that's okay. If there's no last minute questions, then I guess we'll log off. Next week, same time, is Michael and Ian, I think.
Yeah, so Michael will be talking about medical device security, and Ian's going to be talking about his research into sort of big data and DFIR, so incident response.
Yeah, and then the week after that, we'll be back again talking about more stuff that we've been working on in our projects.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Is there another song?
Is there?
No. But yeah, if you want to see more...
No, we're good.
We're good? All right. If you want to see more, check us out you can check out our individual LinkedIns or the generic MCSP, the Leahy Center will be posting updates. Is there anything that I'm missing?
Everything's in the description.
Everything
so
is in
many
the
so many
description.
links. Yeah, we do
Alright.
we do weekly blogs or bi-weekly blogs, all the projects.
Yeah.
Kind of keep up with stuff. Post those on our LinkedIn. You can reach out to MCSP if you want to find out more about the program. Reach out to either Marcus or Claudia there. All sorts of links if you want to keep up with that. But other than that, yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and if anyone's got any questions, reach out. And
Wherever,
yeah.
yeah, blog posts. We all do blog posts. You do blog posts, Ian, I hope.